Welcome back to the Murder Tapes Podcast, Season 4, Episode 6. Before we get started, I have to give a shout out to the man that's basically my dad. His name is Giuseppe, and I also want to shout out my mom because they got me the coolest gifts this past weekend. We were in Houston for Thanksgiving, and as you all know, I'll soon be applying to the FBI program. They surprised me with a brand new Glock 19 and some really cool FBI gear. And having family that believes in you and loves you that much is such a great warm feeling, and I really appreciate it. So I wanted to give them a shout out. And I also wanted to mention that in this episode, you will hear the first ever interview on the podcast with the sweetest Heather Lindow. We actually met through TikTok, and it's so cool to me that the platform connected us because we both love true crime, and whenever I play the interview later on in the episode, you'll hear all about it. Today's episode is on the Jason Eric Massey case, and he is also known as the Cherub face killer. You may have seen the Forensic Files episode on it, but if you haven't, I will link it in the show notes, and a part of it will be in this episode as well. Jason Eric Massey was born on January 7th, 1973 in Hopkins County, Texas, to a young, single mother who struggled with the responsibilities of parenthood. Instead of caring for her newborn, she often left him alone in the car while she indulged in nightlife at local pubs and clubs. 2 years later, she became pregnant again, giving birth to Jason's sister. This shift only compounded the neglect, as both children were frequently left unattended for hours and suffered physical abuse at the hands of their mother, who resorted to beating them with a wooden paddle and a belt. Before starting school, Jason was subjected to a traumatic incident when he was sexually assaulted by a male babysitter. In response, he reacted violently, having learned through his upbringing that aggression was a means to assert control. Living in a state of constant neglect, Jason and his sister faced immense hardships, often appearing at school dirty and malnourished. Their mother would stash food away in her bedroom, and when the children tried to sneak a bite, they were met with punishment. Their impoverished circumstances left them bruised and hungry, making it nearly impossible for Jason to focus on his studies. The family's transient lifestyle only added to their instability, as they frequently moved and were sometimes evicted due to unpaid rent. At one point, the family was forced to live in their mother's car. By the age of 9, Jason began transitioning from a victim to a perpetrator, inflicting harm on a younger boy by restraining and whipping him with a tree branch. This troubling behavior marked the beginning of his transformation into a sexual sadist. Shortly thereafter, he committed his first act of violence against an animal, strangling and mutilating a cat. At 14, Jason welcomed a new baby brother into the family. Although he adored his little sibling, his bitterness towards adults intensified. As he grew into adolescence, his perceptions of womanhood became intertwined with fantasies of violence and domination. Influenced by tales of demons from his devout grandmother, he became increasingly convinced that he could hear these imaginary entities speaking to him. In the face of his traumatic past, Jason turned to alcohol and drugs, leading to a troubled adolescence marked by heavy drinking and substance abuse that would persist until his eventual arrest. His infatuation with a girl soon spiraled into obsession when he mistakenly interpreted her disinterest as a personal rejection, which is something that we see often in these types of cases. This intense reaction manifested in dangerously inappropriate behaviors, including stalking, making harassing phone calls, and even killing her dog. Unbeknownst to the girl, Jason had escalated to torturing and killing other animals. He would hide their skulls in a concealed trunk in the woods. Within this trunk, investigators later discovered numerous poorly spelled diaries filled with chilling thoughts, including disturbing declarations about his desire to harm young girls. As his fantasies grew darker, he began expressing a need for more than just sexual gratification, revealing an unsettling desire for necrophilia. These violent fantasies consumed Jason, providing an escape from his tumultuous home life and the disdain he encountered in his community. Faced with a lack of education, economic hardship, and a longing for significance, His deranged dreams of becoming a notorious serial killer fueled a warped sense of purpose. On July 27, 1993, the 21-year-old roofer acted on his monstrous impulses. He lured 13-year-old Christina Benjamin into a late-night drive, accompanied by her 14-year-old stepbrother, James Brian King. It's important to note that James's father's name is James also, so we'll refer to him as James Sr. and his son as James Jr. James Sr. recalls being woken up by the sound of a car pulling up to his house and honking its horn twice. He looked outside his window and saw a tan car turn off its headlights and park right in front of his house. When he went to the door, he saw his 14-year-old son, James Jr., outside of the car talking to the people inside. Now, it's important to note that James Jr. was outside because he was sleeping on a hammock when the car pulled up. James Sr. then left to the bathroom, and when he returned, both his son and the car had vanished. James Sr. waited for an hour, hoping his son would return, but soon went back to sleep. Upon waking up the next morning, he realized that both his son, James Jr., and stepdaughter, Christina, were both gone. James Sr., along with his common-law wife, Donna Benjamin, initially decided to wait when the children did not return home. Growing increasingly concerned, they soon began searching for the kids and eventually reported them missing to law enforcement. Leading up to their disappearance around 10 days prior, a series of events involving 21-year-old Jason Eric Massey and his friend Christopher Nolan took place. Christopher had persuaded Jason to visit Christina, who was acquainted with him. During their visit, Jason flirted with Christina, who expressed a desire to sneak out at night. Jason promised he would honk his horn at midnight so that she could slip away to meet him at a nearby gas station. After leaving Christina's house, Jason made disturbing remarks to Christopher about his intentions towards her, including threats of violence. Christopher later testified that he dismissed these comments, noting that Jason often spoke about harmful intentions towards women. On July 29, 1993, law enforcement discovered 2 bodies in a field near Tellico. One was a nude female whose heads and hands were missing. She had sustained a gunshot wound and evident mutilation. He chopped off her head, hands, and nipples and then dumped her naked body in a field. I'm now going to play a part of the Forensic Files episode where the medical examiner, Sheila Spotwood, speaks about her wounds.
She looked like a young adolescent, teenage white girl. She also had amputations of both nipples and a number of other cuts, mostly on the front of her body. She had some very long cuts down the front of the abdomen with extrusion or evisceration of part of the intestines to the outside.
The other body was identified as that of Brian King, who had died from multiple gunshot wounds to the head, with 2 bullets later recovered from his brain. Both of their bodies had signs of sexual mutilation. Identifying Christina proved to be more challenging due to her severe injuries, which included a deep wound that resembled an autopsy incision. As days passed and decomposition progressed in the summer heat, immediate identification was impossible. Ultimately, hospital records confirmed the deceased to be Christina. Investigators estimated that both children were killed late July 26th and early July 27th, 1993, with bullet fragments indicating a .22 caliber weapon was used. As investigations progressed, authorities learned that Jason had unlawfully taken a .22 caliber pistol belonging to his cousin. Witnesses confirmed that they saw Jason with the gun, and a Walmart clerk later identified him as the person who purchased ammunition, knives, and handcuffs. On a related note, a local car wash owner observed Jason acting suspiciously in a tan Subaru, where he disposed of items in a trash bin. Upon seeing Jason's photo in the news, the owner recognized him as a potential suspect in the murders. Investigators recovered crucial evidence from the car wash, including a red bandana with blonde hair, broken glass, and a receipt bearing Jason's name. Following a search of Jason's residence, authorities found articles related to the murders, along with handcuffs and a knife box. Further examinations of his car revealed blood traces on various surfaces, including items linked to Christina. DNA tests confirmed a match between the blood found in the vehicle and Christina's. Additionally, microscopic analysis of hair samples linked Jason to the crime scene and the victims. Fur and hair comparisons also connected Jason to the murders. After compiling conclusive evidence, an arrest warrant was issued. When apprehended, Jason reportedly smiled. His actions were reportedly driven by a twisted mix of lust and perverse religious beliefs, as reflected in his writings that suggested a violent destiny was divinely ordained. Jason was swiftly apprehended for the brutal double homicide and gained notoriety during the trial, where testimonies revealed he often spoke about killing. Despite previous interventions by his mother, who had sought help for him, he was released from psychiatric care, underscoring the system's failure to address his escalating violence. Convicted of both murders, Jason was sentenced to death in Texas. Over the 8 years, he navigated the appeals process, even taunting the families of his victims with letters. Investigators suspect he had buried parts of Christina's body with intentions to return to them later. A state witness recounted his unsettling discovery during a walk in the woods, where he stumbled upon a cooler filled with animal skulls, jawbones, and plastic-encased journals labeled Slayer's Book of Death, Volumes 1 through 4. These journals were linked to Jason Massey, with one former friend revealing that Jason had often expressed a desire to kill dogs, cats, cows, and had a disturbing fascination with arson. According to this witness, Jason admitted that he was driven to kill for the adrenaline rush, describing it as a high, a turn-on, and a love to mutilate. He also recounted an armed robbery Jason committed at a fast food restaurant, highlighting the intricately detailed journals kept by Jason. Psychiatrist Dr. Kenneth DeCleva, who evaluated Jason in June 1991 after his mother discovered the unsettling journals, testified about his findings. The journals revealed Jason's intention to embark on a sacred journey as a serial killer. He had written down the names of several girls he wished to target and expressed desire to leave a lasting mark on society through his actions. One of his entries said, quote, "My goal is 700 people in 20 years. He also recorded that he killed 41 cats, 32 dogs, and 7 cows. Jason articulated violent and sadistic fantasies and indicated an interest in understanding criminal and police procedures to avoid capture for his planned crimes. Dr. DeCleva cited the alarming progression in Jason's writings from mere fantasy to meticulous planning, including the procurement of weapons. After the examination, he diagnosed Jason with antisocial personality disorder and deemed him an imminent threat to others, leading to Jason's commitment to the Dallas Psychiatric Intensive Care Unit. DeCleva emphasized that individuals like Jason pose a persistent risk to society and have a high likelihood of reoffending, noting that effective treatments for such cases are virtually non-existent. Testimonies from Jason's 9th grade teacher and a former 7th grade classmate further illustrated his troubling behavior. They described how Jason's conversations frequently revolved around killing, with his teachers noting his idolization of Charles Manson. The classmate recounted receiving threatening phone calls and letters from Jason, in which he shared dreams of killing her. Notably, her dog had been killed and mutilated with blood smeared on her car, an incident Jason had documented in his journal. In late spring 1993, law enforcement stopped Jason in Ennis, discovering marijuana, a Persian cat restrained with a rope, a 3-pronged knife, and a diary featuring names with check marks beside them in his vehicle. An investigator from the Ellis County Sheriff's Department presented letters Jason wrote while incarcerated, revealing his interest in firearms, warfare, and police investigations. In one journal entry, Jason announced his intentions to embark on a career as a serial killer and mass murderer, stating he wanted to, quote, "grab society by the throat and shake them with terror until they're awake and realize what's up." He also envisioned himself as a murder machine, with his writings increasingly detailing ambitions for mass killings. Dr. Clay Griffith, a forensic psychiatrist, also provided testimony after reviewing portions of Jason's journals, letters, Dr. DeCleva's observations, and autopsy reports of current victims. He concluded that Jason posed a future danger to society and was beyond rehabilitation. Dr. Clay noted that while antisocial personality disorder might diminish in some individuals over time, it would not relent in a case as severe as Jason's. FBI agent Alan Brantley echoed this sentiment after reviewing the case. I'm now going to play the interview I did with one of Christina's friends, Heather Lindow, and before I start, I just want to say thank you so much again to Heather, and I'm so thankful that she's the first guest and interview on this podcast. She is so sweet, we have so much in common, and I think y'all are going to love the interview. The video of this interview will be posted on my YouTube and Instagram account, and I will also link it for you guys, and her socials will be in the show notes. I just wanted to first say thank you for joining, but also I kind of just wanted us to formally get to know each other. So I guess I'll go first. I'm Annalie, and I run the Murder Tapes podcast. I've only been doing it for about a year now, and you're the first guest, so I really appreciate that.
How exciting. I'm the one that's thankful. This is so fun.
So I'll let you go. If there's anything you have for me to answer, feel free to ask.
So I grew up in a really small town called Ennis, where nothing ever happened until this happened. And nothing since that. We've never seen anything like that since. Always had an interest in true crime growing up, but didn't really have access to it, like we do now, because there were no podcasts or shows or anything like that. So I think when I was 13, when this happened, I think the only thing I'd ever read about was maybe Jack the Ripper. And I think I'd read a little bit about the Manson family, but just didn't have the exposure, that we do now. So, which made it, I think, extra shocking for everyone because you just don't hear about those kind of things, I think I told you before, I went to UT, also had an interest in criminal justice like you, and thought maybe I would go into the FBI one day as well. Took a little different path, but I graduated from UT and I've been in Austin ever since.
That is so cool. What did you graduate with?
Sociology.
Oh, okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Is it I know it must feel crazy. A couple of my family members went to UT and they always tell me how different it is now. So the way you were talking about crime and how everyone's into true crime now, and most people don't even have degrees for it. They just do podcasts about it. So that's pretty cool that you were going the same route. Okay, so we talked a little bit before I messaged you about the fact that you mentioned your brother knew him. Did your brother ever detail what was off about him at all, or was it just very random?
Yeah, well, I guess I wouldn't say they knew each other. They were in middle school together at the same time. My brother would have been in 6th grade when Jason was in 8th grade. And then, Jason moved on to high school and then dropped out. So my brother that after that wouldn't have, crossed paths with him again. And I asked him recently about that, what did he remember? And he mostly just said that he's someone that if you crossed paths with him, you just didn't want to stop and talk. He's not somebody you would have befriended. And my brother's really nice guy, nice to everyone, but he was no, that's someone I would never have hung out with.
Yeah, that's so crazy to me that, even if y'all didn't talk to him, the fact that y'all crossed paths with him before, that must feel scary to think about.
Yeah, it is.
So my next question is, what was Christina like, and how did her death affect your school or community?
She was a nice, quiet, regular girl. She was in 8th grade. I was in 7th, and typically 7th and 8th graders didn't have class together, except there were some exceptions, which was band. So we had band together. She played flute and I played clarinet, so we sat kind of close to each other. And we didn't have a lot of interactions until the end of the school year in May, right before she was killed in July. We just happened to be in the band hall bathroom at the same time. And I was very dorky. I did not wear any makeup. I didn't know how to fix my hair or any of that kind of stuff. And she was very cool. She looked a lot to me like Christina Applegate from Married with Children. Like, she had the same kind of hair and makeup. And I just thought she was way cooler than me. And so we were in the bathroom and she pulled out, I don't know if you know what this is because of your age, but she pulled out her caboodles, which is like a makeup kit. And she had all of her makeup out and she was so nice to let me use some of it. And I felt so cool that I got to like wear a little bit of makeup that day. And that was really sadly, our only interaction. And then she passed away only like 2 months later.
I do know what a caboodle is, so that's cool.
Okay.
That's cool that you mentioned it. My mom, she wasn't super into makeup when she was younger, but she is like informed me about certain things. So I do know what that is, but that's really cool. The next question I had is, did it change your perspective on how anyone can be a victim?
Yeah, for sure. Because like I said, this was nothing remotely close to this had ever happened. You never think it's going to happen in a town that small where even if you don't personally know someone, you at least know of them. It's like there are no strangers really. So, yeah, it was so shocking that she was so young, and her brother too. It flipped everyone's lives, I think, in that town.
Yeah, and then the next question is kind of leading into what I previously asked, but you mentioned that you have children. Has this affected your personal life and how you go about raising your children? So with whatever they do, are you super cautious, and do you always think about, Christina?
You do have to think about it because you, as a parent, you naturally start teaching them young about like stranger danger, and you don't get into a car with anyone you don't know and all that. But he was their friend. He was known to them. They trusted getting in the car with him to go ride around. So you're like, how do you talk to your kids about that? You don't want them to be terrified of every person, and you want them to be able to make their own friends. But I guess you just have to teach them, to trust their gut. If you ever have the smallest feeling that something's not right, then you don't go with that person. And I think as a parent, and again, this different times, and this was a small town, much different than now, but as a parent, you have to meet your kids' friends, you have to know them. And I, back then, my mom and my parents didn't do that. I mean, I could go riding around with anybody's older sister or brother or whatever. They just didn't think about it, because it just wasn't is something on anyone's mind back then or in that town. So yeah, it sticks with you, and it makes you think about things you probably wouldn't have.
My mom always tells me when I was your age, I was able to go do like all of these different things because it wasn't something that people thought about. It was just you going out with your friends.
Yeah.
So my next question is, did your community arrange a gathering, and did you ever speak with any of her family?
They did not do a gathering. And in fact, Christina was buried in New York. Her funeral was in New York. She was originally from there, and that's where her grandparents still lived. So there was no services there, and her family really kept to themselves, which I don't blame them. So it just kind of, it happened, and there was like a week-long period between it happening and him getting arrested where the whole town, it was kind of turmoil because everyone's wondering like, who did this, and do I know him? And, and then after that, it just kind of, I think people didn't want to talk about it anymore or think about it because it was I think people just wanted to go back to that feeling of like small town safety and like, okay, they got him and he's gone, and we don't want to, talk about it anymore. That's kind of what I felt like.
Yeah. That's crazy. I didn't know that she was buried in New York. So I'm currently working on putting the episode together. And I saw that there's actually like a 60 Minutes episode. I think it's like a Forensic Files episode. There's a couple shows about it, which I didn't know previously. So that's interesting. My next question is, did the police ever question you or your friends? I know you said that y'all were in different grades and stuff like that, so y'all weren't super close, but did they ever question you or anybody that you know?
They didn't question me, but interestingly enough, my best friend, who back then, and she's still my best friend today, her dad is a retired police officer from Ennis. And so he had run-ins with Jason before, like arrested him for drug offenses and things like that. And so before he was apprehended, people started talking about, they found this list of people's names in a notebook. They think it belongs to the same person that killed Christina. And there's all these names on it of who he's targeting next. And she was so worried that her dad's name was, on that list because he would have reason to be angry with him, So I remember that sort of week-long period of her being, when her dad would leave at night to work the night shift, as a policeman, she would just sit home and like cry in her room. She was so scared that someone would get him or come to her house, you know. But yeah, we didn't get formally like interviewed or anything like that. I guess they probably talked to friends in her grade, I would assume.
That's so scary. That's one of my biggest fears is like whenever I do join the FBI is the fact that people can always look up your information and know who you are and who's working on their case and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I can imagine how sad that even scary for her because, you know, she's the daughter. So, and my last question, well, I have two other things I wanted to ask really quick, but how did you feel when you found out about the case?
What happened? I will never forget it as long as I live. I see it so clearly. I was at the swimming pool because it was July. I had just gotten out of the pool. I was going to find my towel and I saw my friend Erica running towards me and her eyes were huge. Like she looked absolutely terrified, and she ran up to me and she grabbed me on both of my shoulders and looked me right in the face and said, "Christina Benjamin got killed and they cut her head off." And then she just left. She like walked off to talk to someone else. And I just stood there and I was trying to process it. I was like, that can't be right. There's no way that happened. I just couldn't make sense of it. And I thought my first thought was I need to get my mom. So I ran over and found my mom. And when I walked up to her, she was standing, she had both hands over her mouth. Just the look on her face was just disbelief, shock, horror, I guess. And I looked at her and she just nodded her head as if to say, yes, it did happen. It's true. And I asked her recently what she remembered about that day because it's so clear in my mind. And she said, I can't pull it back up in my mind. It's like I blocked the whole thing out. And so I imagine, though, now that I'm a mom myself, I imagine what she was thinking in that moment, because there's a saying that says when one mother cries, all mothers cry. And I think she was just probably realizing that Christina's mom was living every parent's just absolute worst nightmare, beyond your worst nightmare, honestly. And then probably also trying to come to terms with the fact that this little town that she'd always felt safe raising her kids in was not that anymore, you know? I mean, it really shook everyone to the core.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine like being in your mom's shoes, first of all, or any of the parents' shoes. It's just scary to think about the fact that that can happen to anybody. And I mean, did your mom ever ask you or like sit you down and talk to you about like what happened or?
No, maybe this is also typical of 80s parenting, but we just didn't talk about a lot of things like that. And I think in general, just like I was saying earlier, I think people in the town just didn't want to talk about it anymore. They wanted to close that off after he was arrested and just not think about it again. That's what it felt like anyway.
Yeah. Okay. So my next thing was, I just wanted to ask, I don't know if you're comfortable with sharing like your socials or anything like that, but where people can follow you if you're interested in that, or that's totally fine if you don't want to as well. It's just, I wanted to give you the opportunity in case you wanted people to know what your socials are.
Sure, you can. I'm an old lady and I finally got off Facebook and don't really use Instagram, but I am on TikTok. I do love TikTok. Well, obviously that's how I found you. So my handle for TikTok is As the Crow Tries. I'm trying to get on it more, but I'm like self-conscious as a mid-40s woman because I know younger people on TikTok are like, ew, get off of here. This is not this is not a place for you.
No, you can definitely be on it. I'm happy that we found each other through there. I think it's really cool how social media can connect people because, you know, we're not that far from each other for one. We both like true crime. You know, obviously we're not the same age, but still it's cool that we can like be friends and about true crime and stuff. So I would love to get coffee with you sometime or food. And then I'm going to stop the recording because I do want to like ask you something else. But before I do that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being the first guest that I have on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. This is my favorite thing to talk about, and you're doing such a good job.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pause it really. Jason entered a not guilty plea in the case of the murders of Christina Benjamin and Brian King. He faced indictment for the capital murder of both children, pleaded not guilty, but was convicted by a jury on October 6, 1994. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld his conviction, and all subsequent appeals filed in both state and federal courts were denied. During his execution by lethal injection in Huntsville, Jason acknowledged his crime and expressed remorse to the families of the victims, stating, quote, "I do not know any of y'all, and that is unfortunate because I would like to apologize to each and every one of you individually. I want you to know I did do it. I'm sorry for what I have done. I want you to know that Christina did not suffer as much as you think she did. I know you guys want to know where the rest of her remains are. I put her remains in the Trinity River." Now, it's important to note that these body parts were never found. Investigators believe that they might have just floated all the way down to the river and are gone for good. Following this admission, he conveyed his love for various family members, apologizing for the pain he had caused them. Jason reflected on how his experience had brought about personal change, declaring, quote, "All of this pain has brought us closer together, and all of this suffering that we have been through has brought us closer to the Lord, and in the end, that is what counts." In his final remarks, he added, "Tonight I dance on the streets of gold. Let those without sin cast the first stone." With his last words spoken, the execution process commenced, and Jason was pronounced dead at 6:20 p.m. His defense team would say, quote, "Jason Massey was not born a capital murderer. He was a baby. He wanted a dad. He wanted love. Instead, he got rejection and he got hit." Before we continue, it's always so interesting to me. I know that that is how defense teams work. They have to defend their client, but just because somebody has a bad childhood, and I've said this in many of these episodes, does not mean that they are bound to be serial killers and hurt people constantly. That is not how it works. It is not an excuse. And Jason idolized notorious criminals such as Ted Bundy, Charles Manson, and Henry Lee Lucas, the latter of whom he would eventually share time with on death row in Texas. He craved the notoriety they garnered, infamously stating, quote, "I would have gotten better," as a warning of his intent. This mindset, along with the evidence presented during his trial, led an Ellis County jury to reach a verdict in just 15 minutes, opting for the death penalty. Clay Strange, now an assistant district attorney in Austin, remarked, quote, "It's impossible to assign a motive to a case like this. I believe he committed these acts because it gave him pleasure." This case is so heartbreaking, and I cannot imagine losing two family members in one night in this horrific way. And I truly hope that time has given their family some closure. As always, all evidence will be linked in the show notes, and you can find photos on our Instagram at Murder Tapes Podcast. Feel free to also follow my personal at Annalisa. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you on the next one.